Hi there, this is going to be the fastest recap you've ever heard of the current situation as of March 27th of Nexon's claims versus Ironmaces' response in the legal battle. Nexon claims that an employee A stole Project 3 assets, which was their Dark and Darker styled game, and then was fired. Ironmaces' response was that employee A was following COVID protocols, which was okayed at first by Nexon higher-ups. They then revealed that there's a 3-month period where it was not okayed by Nexon higher-ups, but Nexon higher-ups didn't complain or say anything about it until later when employee A is fired. But employee A is only fired, according to Ironmace, after they are saying they're going to make their own company and make their own game because Project 3 was scrapped already. Nexon's claim is that Project 3 was scrapped because of stolen codes and assets, or at least scrapped after the theft. Project 3 claims this timeline's not accurate and that it was scrapped before any asset or code issues, and that employee A was fired because he planned on leaving to create the game that was already scrapped. Both agree that this essentially left employee A basically sniping employees who also wanted to work on Project 3 but couldn't any longer because the project was scrapped, and now they all moved over to the Dark and Darker Ironmace studio. The third thing is the stolen assets. That none of that involves, to be clear, Ironmace or Dark and Darker. Those are all just between Nexon and employee A. That's a lawsuit between them. This next 2 points is how it ties in, right? The first 2 points kind of give like employee A access, the opportunity per se, but not necessarily the execution of putting the code into Dark and Darker. The next claim is that the stolen assets were then used to create Dark and Darker, as evidenced by 2,338 identical file names. Ironmace's response was that 1,306 of those files are just regular everyday Unity files. They are in any Unity game that exists. An additional 950 files were from the Unity store, which can be used by anybody if you purchase the various asset packs, skeleton models, UI models, anything that's available on the Unity store. The final 82 files, which did share a common name, which is the minority of these files that were claimed to have identical names, are just common names for the genre. They also offered to send those 82 files that have identical names but aren't available on the Unity store or are just part of Unity to a third party for review. So essentially they're offering for Nexon and Ironmace to both send those assets, and then that person can compare, or that party can compare the two assets to see if any of them are actually identical or if they just have a similar name because they're in a similar genre. The fourth claim that Nexon makes is that the entire idea of Dark and Darker is just a stolen idea of Project 3. Ironmace's response is that it's your claim, your points aren't valid because your points are just pointing out that this is also a fantasy game. It's inspired by Dungeons and Dragons. We have the same classes, fighters, clerics, rogues, rangers, because that's what exists in dark fantasy games. We have torches because it's a dark fantasy dungeon crawling game. It's not an unheard of mechanic. They also claim that there's various other claims that they make regarding style, storyline. They claim that all of that is just related to we're both inspired by the same thing. We're both making a game in the same genre. It's not specific enough. There's no core things that are guaranteed to be copies, right? They're both PvPvE extraction games based in the same world. Those are guaranteed similarities. The entire thing then boils down to, post that, if you agree that there's assets that look very similar. They attribute that to style, but also the fact that they have shared employees that were working at different times. Specifically, there's a 2D artist that they share who made a lot of the 2D assets for like the characters, like wizards, clerics, rogues. They're all drawn by the same person. They said none of the assets are actually the same, but they are all drawn by the same person. That's why they look the same. To prove their point of how generic all this is, they used a ChatGPT bot to prove that if you give them the same prompt, the story will sound like both of these games. And you can read it in their Discord, or you can read it on Reddit. That's essentially the entire claim in a nutshell.
You spent all this time